The cameras caught it all. Every flicker, every pause, every second of silence that followed. J.D. Vance had entered the debate brimming with confidence, his chin high, his voice sharpened with rehearsed talking points. He came ready to dominate, to sneer, to dismiss. But Crockett wasn't there to play his game. She leaned forward, eyes locked on him, her voice steady as stone. "Senator Vance," she said, the words deliberate, almost surgical, "you've built your career on a story you've betrayed at every turn. And tonight, the record catches up with you." Vance opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The smirk that had carried him through earlier exchanges faltered. His lips pressed together, his eyes darted, searching for an escape that wasn't there. And then the silence. It wasn't the silence of composure. It was the silence of a man cornered, stripped of his rehearsed lines, staring at evidence too sharp to dismiss. The audience felt it instantly. Viewers at home leaned forward, eyes wide, waiting for a rebuttal that never came. Crockett let the silence hang, a master of timing. She didn't rush to fill it. She didn't let him off the hook. She simply held her ground, the receipts in her hand, the power in her voice. And in that silence, the balance of the room shifted. Social feeds lit up in real time. She ended him. His silence said, "Everything. Clips. We're already being clipped. Memes already being born." Crockett's precision had carved through the fog, leaving Vance with nothing but his own collapse on live television. But moments like these don't happen out of nowhere. They are built brick by brick, argument by argument, until the final strike lands with devastating clarity. The question that hung in the air was simple. How did Jasmine Crockett set the stage so perfectly for this brutal silence? Because the road to this takedown began long before the cameras rolled. This wasn't just another televised clash of egos. What unfolded between Jasmine Crockett and J.D.? Vance spoke to something far deeper, a struggle over whose story defines America. Vance had built his brand on the narrative of grit and hardship, the best-selling author who rose from poverty in Appalachia. But in Washington, critics argue, he had traded that authenticity for political expediency. Where once he railed against corruption, he now defended it. Where once he claimed to speak for working families, he now bent the knee to the powerful. That's what made Crockett's confrontation so piercing. She wasn't debating him over policy minutia. She was striking at the heart of his credibility, exposing the gulf between the man on the campaign trail and the man behind the Senate desk. And the timing couldn't have been more electric. The nation was weary of hypocrisy, exhausted by leaders who preached about everyday Americans while cutting deals for elites. So when Crockett began to press him, viewers weren't just listening for her words, they were measuring his reaction. But as the evidence piled up, Vance faltered. Each hesitation told its own story. Each silence chipped away at the image he had carefully crafted. Crockett wasn't simply debating him. She was unmasking him. And that's when the realization began to spread. If his story could be dismantled so easily, then perhaps the truth had always been thinner than advertised. What happened next didn't just raise eyebrows. It raised the stakes of the entire debate. Because Crockett wasn't done. She was only getting started. To understand the weight of J.D. Vance's silence, you have to understand the story he's been selling and the story he's been living. Vance burst onto the national stage with Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir that promised to explain the struggles of forgotten America. He framed himself as a truth teller, a product of poverty who clawed his way out and carried the scars of working-class life. To many, he became a symbol, the boy who made it, the insider who still remembered the outside. But that was the myth. The reality has looked very different. Once a vocal critic of Donald Trump, calling him dangerous and an American Hitler, Vance later pivoted when the political winds shifted. He embraced the very figure he once condemned, not because his convictions had changed, but because power required it. Former supporters saw the transformation and wondered, was it survival or was it betrayal? And as the cameras rolled, the dissonance between the myth and the man finally snapped into focus. But Crockett's brilliance wasn't just in dismantling Vance, it was in contrasting his collapse with her own rise. Jasmine Crockett didn't arrive in that debate hall by accident. Her very presence was a testament to grit, sacrifice, and an unshakable belief that justice belongs to everyone, not just the privileged few. Long before the cameras captured her sharp rebuke of J.D. Vance, Crockett was walking the streets of Dallas as a public defender. She saw up close what it meant to be overlooked and unheard. Clients who couldn't afford bail, families caught in cycles of poverty and incarceration, lives dismissed as statistics. While others turned away, she leaned in. She listened. She fought. That grounding shaped her into more than just another politician. It made her an advocate who knew the difference between words that sound good in a speech and actions that actually change lives. And when she entered Congress, she carried that same fire with her, the conviction that dignity isn't negotiable. Unlike Vance, Crockett never had the luxury of reinventing herself for power. She had to prove herself step by step in a system that wasn't designed for her to succeed. As a Black woman in the political arena, the deck was stacked against her. Yet she turned those barriers into fuel, channeling them into a voice that refused to be silenced. That's what gave her the edge in that debate. She wasn't there to score points or polish her image. She was there for the people whose stories often vanish in the noise of politics. Her strength came not from calculation, but from authenticity. So when she turned her attention on J.D. Vance, it wasn't just one politician sparring with another. It was a woman forged by the struggles of her community, challenging a man who had abandoned the struggles of his. It was the lived experience of honesty confronting the performance of hypocrisy. And that contrast, raw, undeniable, and unflinching, is what made the silence that followed her words so deafening. Because Crockett wasn't just holding her own. She was holding the weight of every person who'd ever been dismissed, ignored, or underestimated. And in that moment, she made it clear. She wasn't about to back down. The real showdown was only beginning. The sparks flew fast and the cameras missed nothing. J.D. Vance tried to claw back the ground he had lost, his voice sharpening as he leaned into the microphone. He threw out phrases meant to sting. Out of touch, not radical. Partisan. Each word landed with the hollow echo of someone, hoping volume could replace conviction. But Crockett didn't flinch. She stayed composed, her tone measured, almost surgical. Every time he interrupted, she waited, then cut through his words with clarity. Each interruption exposed him further, revealing a man scrambling for control. As the narrative slipped through his fingers, the audience could sense the imbalance. What began as Vance's attempt to dominate the exchange quickly turned into a display of his own unraveling. His interruptions grew more frantic, his rebuttals thinner. He raised his voice, but the louder he spoke, the more obvious it became. He had no answer to the receipts Crockett was laying bare, and Crockett knew it. Instead of matching his fire with fire, she chose precision. She leaned into pauses. She repeated his contradictions. She let the weight of facts do the heavy lifting. The result wasn't just a clash of arguments. It was a dismantling. By the midpoint of the debate, even commentators watching from the sidelines began to notice. The camera's split screen told the story. On one side, a senator fuming and flailing. On the other, a congresswoman unbothered, commanding the room with the kind of calm that speaks louder than shouting ever could. But Crockett wasn't finished. If the escalation rattled Vance, the next moment would shatter the illusion entirely. Because what came next wasn't just a rebuttal, it was the mic drop that silenced him for good. The debate reached its breaking point. Vance had raised his voice, interrupted, tried to paint Crockett as extreme, but the cracks were showing. And then, with the nation watching, Jasmine Crockett unleashed the moment that would be replayed, shared, and memed across every platform. She didn't shout. She didn't flail. Instead, she leaned forward, calm and deliberate, holding a printed sheet in her hand. Her tone was razor-sharp but controlled. "Senator Vance," she began, her eyes never leaving his. "You talk about standing for families, but here's the vote you cast. In black and white, that cut, funding for childcare for working parents. And here," she said, lifting another page, "is your speech from 2 years ago promising to never do exactly that." The papers hit the table with a soft thud, but the sound carried like thunder. The audience gasped. Commentators' pens froze mid-scribble, and the camera zoomed in on Vance's face. For a split second, he tried to respond. Lips parted, breath caught. But the words didn't come. He glanced down, blinked rapidly, then forced a smirk that collapsed almost as quickly as it appeared. His silence screamed louder than any rebuttal could. Crockett seized the pause. "So which is it, Senator? Were you lying then? Or are you lying now?" The silence that followed was electric. You could almost hear the hum of the studio lights. Viewers at home felt the weight of it, the unmistakable moment when power shifted. Social media ignited instantly. "Play it again." She ended him. Clips spread like wildfire, each replay magnifying the humiliation. It was the counterattack every debater dreams of. Every opponent dreads, factual, personal, and undeniable. The kind of moment that doesn't just win arguments, it leaves a legacy. But as explosive as it was, the fallout was only beginning. Because the ripple effects from that, silence would stretch far beyond. One debate stage. The clip was barely seconds old before it exploded across the internet. Twitter feeds lit up with captions like, "That's how you check," "Hypocrisy," and "Vance just got schooled on live TV," TikTok edits. Layered the silence with dramatic sound effects. Looping Crockett's line, "Were you lying then, or are you lying now?" Like it was a chorus. Within hours, hashtags trended nationally. His silence has said it all. Crockett receipts. Memes flooded timelines. From split-screen freeze frames of Vance's stunned face to GIFs comparing his pause to the buffering wheel on a frozen screen. The humiliation wasn't just personal. It had gone viral. Commentators piled on. Pundits on cable news replayed the moment on loop, dissecting the silence, analyzing the body language, calling it one of the most brutal takedowns of the election cycle. Even conservative-leaning voices admitted, that was hard to watch. Meanwhile, Crockett's stock soared. Supporters hailed her as fearless, authentic, the rare voice willing to cut through doublespeak with receipts. For communities long tired of polished hypocrisy, she became a symbol of what it looks like to fight with both dignity and precision. Because Crockett's strike hadn't just exposed one senator, it tapped into a larger frustration pulsing across the country with leaders who forget the people who put them there. And that resonance made the silence more than a gaffe. It made it a warning. The stage was now set for the moral lesson at the heart of this battle. What Crockett delivered on that debate stage wasn't just a sharp takedown of J.D. Vance. It was a reminder of something far bigger. That politics isn't supposed to be about self-promotion, betrayal, or rehearsed sound bites. It's supposed to be about truth, service, and the people. She didn't need to match his volume. She didn't need to drown him out. Instead, she trusted the weight of facts, the clarity of her convictions, and the authenticity of her voice. That restraint, that discipline, turned his silence into her victory. And that's the lesson. When leaders forget their promises, when they trade principle for power, the truth eventually catches up. It may come quietly, in a few printed receipts laid bare under the lights. It may come with a question so sharp it leaves no room for escape. For every viewer who has ever felt dismissed or underestimated, Crockett's stand was more than political theater. It was proof that calm resolve can disarm arrogance, that speaking truth to power can cut deeper than shouting ever could, and that silence, in the right moment, can be louder than 1,000 words. Her final message wasn't just to JD Vance, it was to the country. Justice doesn't need to scream to be heard. Sometimes it simply needs to stand its ground and let the truth do the talking. And so, with one line, Jasmine Crockett sealed the night. Were you lying then, or are you lying now? It was more than a question. It was a verdict. A sentence delivered not in a courtroom, but on live television, where millions could judge for themselves. JD Vance's silence told the whole story. The moment became etched into the memory of viewers because it distilled something raw and undeniable, the difference between performance and principle. Crockett's calm clarity against Vance's collapse wasn't just political theater, it was a civics lesson. It showed what accountability looks like when power is forced to face the truth. But this wasn't only about two people on a stage. It was about what we, as a country, demand from those who represent us. Do we accept empty slogans and shifting loyalties? Or do we reward courage, honesty, and the willingness to stand tall even when it's uncomfortable? Crockett's stand reminds us that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's the sound of a false narrative collapsing under the weight of truth. And that truth belongs not to politicians, but to the people. That's why her moment resonated so deeply. It wasn't about partisanship. It was about integrity. It was about the reminder that in America, dignity can still triumph over arrogance if we choose to lift up the voices that fight for it. So if you felt the power of that silence, if you believe the truth should never be buried under spin, now is the time to act. Share this story. Subscribe for more moments where justice speaks louder than noise. Be part of the movement that insists on honesty and power. Because this wasn't just Crockett's victory, it was ours.